Alright, so I'm going to quickly touch on when you would be using a utility or a telescoping knife like this guy here, or when you would be using a hobby knife or an X-Acto blade like this. Now these are rules of thumb. They're not hard set rules. Ultimately you'll have to figure out what works best for you, but these are the basics. So when generally you'll be using a utility knife, a telescoping blade like this, when working with thicker foam like anti-fatigue floor mats. The smaller blade just isn't going to work too well on it. It's not sturdy enough, and it's going to be tough to get deep enough into the foam. You'll also be using it generally with larger patterns, kind of like this, that doesn't have a lot of intricate details in it when cutting it out. As for working with the X-Acto blade or hobby knife, you'll generally be using it when working with thinner foam like this 2mm foam right here. It works really nicely with it, and with smaller patterns like this that are going to have more sharper details and curves on the edges, and kind of like this guy here. Now as for cutting, general rule of thumb is you want square cuts, perpendicular cuts to the table across the foam. You want to be cutting across like this. You want to avoid putting any sort of angle in there. So those are your straight cuts, and they're pretty straightforward, especially if you use a sharp knife. If you've got a well sharpened utility blade, it's a pretty simple thing to do. So as you can see here, you get one pass through, and I have a square cut on that guy. Now another type of cut that you might use in some instances is a bevel cut, which is just, you're just going to have an angle to the cut as opposed to having it straight up and down. And what I find works best for a bevel cut is making sure you're cutting towards you safely, of course, but cutting towards you as opposed to cutting sideways or cutting away from you, because you're going to want to hold the blade at a 45-degree angle when you're cutting. So when starting off, you want to set the blade at approximately a 45-degree angle before you start cutting, and carefully work your way into the foam, and then just pull all the way through. Now bevel cuts are a little bit trickier to do, and sometimes that was almost a completely clean cut, but there you go. See, you've got a bevel cut on that guy right there, and that's the other side of the bevel cut right there. So those are the two main cuts that you're going to be doing with foam. They're going to be either your straight cuts or your bevel cuts. And another key thing is, with your blades, you want to sharpen them. You want to get something, some sort of sanding stone that you can sharpen them regularly. It's going to be a lot easier to sharpen these guys regularly than replacing the blades. It's going to be a lot cheaper that way. So I recommend getting a sanding stone if you don't have one. And I would recommend generally after you're done cutting one piece, let's say for example if I use this pattern, I placed this out and I was cutting this out. Once I was done cutting this guy out, I would sharpen this again before going in and cutting another piece. So it's just a pretty straightforward thing, and you are ready for your next piece to cut. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to learn more about using foam for costumes and props, click on one of the videos on the right. If you'd like to pick up some patterns to make your own foam armor, click the image on the left.